The plane sat at the gate, humming softly as passengers boarded. It was a typical morning at JFK Airport in New York, with travelers dragging their suitcases and settling into their seats for the long flight to Los Angeles. Marcus Johnson, a tall man with short-cropped hair and a calm demeanor, walked down the aisle of the aircraft. He had a leather briefcase in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. This trip wasn't just another business journey. It was a much-needed break after weeks of non-stop work. Marcus found his seat in business class without any trouble. The soft leather chair felt comfortable as he settled in. He placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him and pulled out his phone to check emails before takeoff. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, but Marcus didn't know that this flight would turn into something far more complicated than he could have imagined. A few rows behind him, Emily Dawson, a middle-aged woman with blonde hair tied neatly in a bun, was searching for her seat. She glanced at her ticket again and frowned. Her name was clearly printed on it, along with the words economy class. Confused, she approached one of the flight attendants standing near the entrance to the business class section. "I think there's been a mistake," Emily said, holding up her ticket. "My reservation says I'm supposed to be in business class." The flight attendant, a young man named Alex, took the ticket and examined it closely. "Let me check our records," he replied politely. After tapping a few keys on his tablet, Alex shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your booking shows economy seating. There must have been an error when you purchased your ticket." Emily sighed deeply, looking frustrated. "This can't be right. I paid extra for business class. I don't understand how this happened." She glanced toward the luxurious seats in front of her, where Marcus sat quietly reading an email. Something about his presence caught her attention. "Is that my seat?" she asked suddenly, pointing toward Marcus. "That man is sitting where I should be." Alex followed her gaze and hesitated. "Ma'am, that seat is already occupied by another passenger. Let me double-check." "No need to check," Emily interrupted firmly. "I know what I paid for. That's my seat, and I want it now." Her tone grew sharper, drawing curious looks from nearby passengers. Alex tried to remain calm. "Ma'am, we'll do everything we can to resolve this issue. Please wait here while I confirm with the gate staff." But Emily wasn't willing to wait. She marched straight toward Marcus, stopping beside his seat. "Excuse me," she said loudly, interrupting his concentration. "Are you sitting in seat 7A? Marcus looked up, surprised by the sudden intrusion. "Yes, I am," he answered, calmly, showing her his boarding pass. "Is there a problem?" Emily crossed her arms over her chest. "There's definitely a problem. That's my seat. You're in the wrong place." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat. Here's my ticket." He held it out for her to see, but Emily barely glanced at it. "It doesn't matter what your ticket says," she snapped. "I paid for business class and I deserve to sit here, not back in economy." By now, several passengers were watching the exchange unfold. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Others exchanged glances, sensing the tension building between the two. At that moment, Alex returned, flanked by another flight attendant. "Ma'am, please step aside so we can sort this out," Alex said gently, trying to diffuse the situation. Emily turned to him, her voice rising. "Sort it out? How hard is it to move this person to economy? He's obviously in the wrong seat." Marcus frowned, feeling a mix of irritation and disbelief. "Excuse me," he interjected, addressing both Emily and the flight attendants. "I have a valid ticket for this seat. If there's an issue, it's not with me, it's with your system." One of the flight attendants, a woman named Sarah, stepped forward. "Sir, we understand your frustration, but we also need to accommodate all our passengers. Would you mind moving to economy temporarily until we figure this out?" Marcus stared at her, stunned. "Temporarily? Why should I have to move when I've done nothing wrong? Shouldn't the person who made the mistake be the one to adjust?" Sarah hesitated, glancing nervously at Emily, whose face was growing redder by the second. "It's just for customer satisfaction," Sarah explained weakly. "We aim to make everyone comfortable." Marcus leaned back in his seat, shaking his head. "Comfortable? You're asking me, the person who followed the rules, to give Up my seat because someone else claims they deserve it? Does that sound fair to you? His words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Passengers around them began whispering among themselves. One man muttered, "This is ridiculous," while a woman seated nearby nodded in agreement. Rachel Monroe, a young journalist traveling alone, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. She had noticed Emily's aggressive attitude from the start and couldn't help but feel skeptical about her claims. Pulling out her phone discreetly, Rachel started recording the interaction, ensuring she captured every detail. Back in the aisle, Emily's patience was wearing thin. "If he won't move, then maybe you should make him," she told the flight attendants sharply. "Isn't that your job?" The pressure mounted on Alex and Sarah, who exchanged worried looks. Finally, Sarah turned to Marcus once more. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience, but we'd appreciate it if you could relocate to economy for now. We'll ensure you receive compensation for the trouble." Marcus clenched his jaw, realizing he had no choice but to comply. Arguing further would only delay the flight and create more drama. "Fine," he said curtly, gathering his belongings. "But this isn't over." As he stood up and moved past Emily, who smirked triumphantly, Marcus felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over him. He had worked tirelessly to build his career, earning respect and recognition in a world that often doubted him because of the color of his skin. Yet here he was, being treated like an intruder in a space he had rightfully paid for. Rachel watched silently as Marcus took his new seat in economy, squeezing himself into the cramped quarters. She wanted to say something, to offer support, but decided to wait until later. For now, she tucked her phone away, determined to follow up once the plane landed. The rest of the boarding process continued in awkward silence. Passengers avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice the simmering tension aboard the aircraft. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus stared out the small window, replay the incident in his mind. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a story that would spark nationwide conversations and change the course of his life forever. The plane soared high above the clouds, but Marcus Johnson's thoughts were far from the breathtaking view outside his tiny economy-class window. He sat with his arms crossed, staring blankly at the seatback in front of him. The encounter with Emily Dawson and the flight attendants replayed in his mind over and over again. Each time it felt worse. Marcus wasn't new to situations like this. Growing up as a black man in America, he had faced his share of discrimination, both subtle and blatant. But today's incident hit differently. It wasn't just about being asked to give up his seat. It was the way it happened. The dismissive tone of the flight attendants, Emily's smug expression when she got her way, and the silent complicity of the other passengers, it all added up to something deeply personal. He tried to distract himself by opening his laptop, hoping work would take his mind off things. But even the spreadsheets and emails couldn't hold his attention. Every notification on his phone seemed louder than usual, every rustle of movement around him more noticeable. He felt trapped, not just in the cramped economy seat, but in a system that never seemed to see him as equal. A few rows ahead, Rachel Monroe observed Marcus from her aisle seat. She had been watching him since the incident began, feeling a mix of anger and sympathy. As a journalist who often covered social justice issues, Rachel knew stories like this weren't uncommon. But seeing it unfold firsthand gave her a new perspective. She wanted to do something, to help if she could. Finally, after what felt like hours, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and walked down the narrow aisle toward Marcus. She tapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Do you mind if I sit here for a moment?" Marcus looked up, surprised. Sure," he replied, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. Rachel slid into the seat and smiled warmly. "I saw what happened earlier. I'm really sorry about how they treated you. That wasn't right." Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "Thanks," he muttered. "It's not the first time something like this has happened, but it still gets to me." "I can imagine," Rachel said, her voice sincere. "If you don't mind me asking, are you planning to report it or do anything about it?" Marcus hesitated. The thought had crossed his mind, but he hadn't decided yet. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to let it go and move on. But another part feels like, if I don't say something, nothing will change." Rachel nodded understandingly. "That's completely valid. Sometimes speaking up is exhausting, but it can also make a difference. People need to hear these stories." Marcus sighed, leaning back slightly. "It's not just about me, though. It's about everyone who goes through stuff like this and doesn't have the platform or resources to fight back. I've worked hard to get where I am, but not everyone has that luxury." Rachel listened intently, sensing the weight behind his words. "You're right," she said, "and honestly, your story could inspire others to speak out too. If you decide to take action, I'd be happy to help however I can. I write articles about inequality, so I know how important it is to shine a light on these moments." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You're a writer?" "Yes," Rachel replied. "Mostly freelance, but I've published pieces in some major outlets. I recorded the whole thing earlier, by the way, just in case you ever need proof." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "You recorded it? Why?" "Because I thought it might come in handy," Rachel explained. "Stories like yours deserve to be told, especially when they expose systemic problems. If you're okay with it, I'd like to use the footage to show exactly what happened." For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. He stared at Rachel, weighing her words carefully. On one hand, sharing the video publicly could bring unwanted attention and backlash. On the other hand, it could also force people to confront the uncomfortable truth about bias and privilege. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "But thank you for saying something and for offering to help. Most people wouldn't bother." Rachel shrugged modestly. "It's the least I can do. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of thing alone." The two continued talking quietly, their conversation shifting to lighter topics. Marcus learned that Rachel was traveling to Los Angeles for a conference, while Rachel discovered that Marcus owned a tech company specializing in artificial intelligence. Despite their different backgrounds, they found common ground in their shared frustration with injustice. As the plane descended toward LAX, Marcus felt a flicker of resolve growing inside him. He realized he couldn't stay silent. Not this time. Too much was at stake. When the aircraft touched down and taxied to the gate, Marcus grabbed his briefcase and stood up, ready to act. Once off the plane, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Lisa, it's me," he said briskly as soon as his assistant answered. "I need you to set up a meeting with our legal team ASAP. There's something we need to discuss." Lisa Carter, always efficient, picked up on his urgency immediately. "Of course, Marcus, what's going on?" "It's a long story," Marcus replied, glancing around the crowded terminal. "But basically, I was removed from business class on this flight because of racial bias. And I'm done letting things like this slide." Lisa paused, clearly taken aback. "Are you serious? That's outrageous." "I know," Marcus said firmly, "which is why we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to me and not to anyone else." Meanwhile, Rachel lingered nearby, waiting for her luggage. Before heading to baggage claim, she approached Marcus one last time. "Hey, before we part ways, can I get your contact info, in case you want to talk more about writing that article?" Marcus handed her a business card. "Sure. Thanks again for everything." "No problem," Rachel said with a small smile. "Take care, Marcus, and good luck." As Marcus walked away, he felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, determination, and a hint of hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he had the power to create change. For once, he wasn't just going to accept the status quo. This time, he was going to challenge it. Back at home later that evening, Marcus sat at his desk, drafting notes for the lawsuit he planned to file against the airline. He reached out to Lisa periodically, ensuring all the necessary documents were prepared. Each email, each call, brought him closer to taking a stand. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. By midnight, Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a battle he hadn't anticipated, but one he was ready to fight. Little did he know his decision would spark a chain reaction, inspiring countless others to demand accountability and justice in their own lives. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, his mind buzzing with thoughts about the lawsuit and everything that lay ahead. He brewed a cup of coffee and sat at his dining table, staring out the window as sunlight streamed in. The quiet calm of his apartment felt like a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. This wasn't just about getting justice for himself anymore. It was about making a statement. By mid-morning, Marcus arrived at his office where Lisa Carter was already waiting, with stacks of papers and legal documents. "Good morning," she greeted him briskly. "I've got everything ready for the initial meeting with our lawyers. They're expecting us at 10. "Thanks, Lisa," Marcus replied, setting down his briefcase. "Did you manage to pull together all the details about my shares in the airline?" Lisa nodded, handing him a folder. "Yes. Turns out you own nearly 5% of the company through one of your investment portfolios. I don't think anyone at the airline even knows yet." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the revelation. 5%? That's significant. For a moment, he let the information sink in. Owning such a large stake gave him leverage he could use to push for real change within the company. "Make sure we include that in the briefing for the lawyers. It might come in handy later." As they prepared for the meeting, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this fight would go beyond just filing a lawsuit. He knew it had the potential to become a public spectacle, but he also understood that sometimes attention was necessary to drive meaningful action. At exactly 10 o'clock, Marcus and Lisa walked into the conference room, where Daniel Hayes, their lead attorney, was already seated. Daniel was a seasoned lawyer, known for his sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach. His presence alone made Marcus feel more confident about what lay ahead. "All right," Daniel began without wasting time. "Let's go over the facts. You were removed from business class due to racial bias, correct?" Marcus nodded. "That's right. The flight attendant sided with another passenger who claimed her seat assignment was incorrect. Despite showing them my boarding pass, they asked me to move back to economy." Daniel jotted down notes, his expression serious. "And how do you want to proceed?" "We can file a discrimination lawsuit against the airline, seeking damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. But given your position, and now your ownership stake, we could take things further." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. "Well," Daniel explained, "with your level of influence, you could demand accountability not just for yourself, but for systemic issues within the airline. For example, dismissing the crew involved in the incident sends a strong message about corporate responsibility." Marcus considered this carefully. "You're saying I should fire the entire flight crew?" "It's an option," Daniel replied. "It wouldn't be revenge, it would be a demonstration of zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Plus, it puts pressure on the airline to implement better training and policies." Lisa chimed in. "If we play this right, it could turn into a catalyst for broader change across the industry. Imagine the ripple effect if other companies start taking similar stands." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the weight of the decision. Firing the crew members would undoubtedly draw criticism from some quarters, but it might also inspire others to hold their employers accountable. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's move forward with the lawsuit and prepare to address the crew issue publicly after we gather more evidence." With the plan set, the team spent the next hour discussing strategy and timelines. By the end of the meeting, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about settling a score, it was about setting a precedent. Later that afternoon, news of the incident started spreading online. Rachel Monroe had uploaded the video she recorded during the flight, along with a short article detailing what happened. Within hours, social media erupted. Hashtags like Knockshare Justice for Marcus and Narc Airline Bias began trending nationwide, drawing thousands of comments and shares. People shared their own experiences of facing discrimination while traveling. Some praised Marcus for handling the situation with dignity, while others criticized the airline for its apparent lack of accountability. Journalists reached out to Marcus requesting interviews, But he declined for now, wanting to focus on building a solid case before going public. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to respond to the growing backlash. Their PR team issued a generic apology, stating that they were investigating the matter and committed to providing exceptional service to all passengers. However, the statement did little to quell the outrage. Critics pointed out that the response lacked any acknowledgement of racial bias or concrete steps to prevent future incidents. Back at Marcus's office, Lisa monitored the news closely, keeping track of public sentiment. "This is blowing up faster than we expected," she told Marcus during a quick update. "Should we release a statement addressing the video and the lawsuit?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let them sweat a bit. When we do speak, it needs to be impactful." As the day wore on, Marcus received messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers moved by his story. One message stood out, a text from Andrew Miller, his longtime mentor and friend. Andrew had been instrumental in guiding Marcus through the early days of building his tech company, and his opinion carried significant weight. "Hey Marcus," the text read. "I saw the news. Are you okay? Call me when you have a minute." Marcus hesitated before dialing Andrew's number. He appreciated the concern but braced himself for the inevitable lecture. Sure enough, Andrew didn't mince words. "Look, Marcus, I get why you're upset," Andrew said once they were on the phone. "But firing the entire crew? Isn't that a bit extreme? You risk alienating people who might otherwise support you." "I'm not doing this for popularity, Andrew," Marcus replied firmly. "This is about holding people accountable. If the airline doesn't take responsibility for its employees' actions, then I will." Andrew sighed audibly. "I hear you, but think about the optics. Some people are going to see this as revenge rather than justice. And others will see it as a wake-up call," Marcus countered. "Change doesn't happen unless someone pushes for it. I've worked too hard to let moments like this slip by unnoticed." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Andrew spoke again, his tone softer. "All right, Marcus, I trust your judgment. Just tread carefully." "All right? I will," Marcus promised. "Thanks for looking out for me." After hanging up, Marcus reflected on Andrew's advice. He knew there would be challenges ahead, criticism, resistance, maybe even personal attacks. But he also knew he couldn't back down. This was bigger than him now. That evening, Marcus met Rachel for coffee at a quiet cafe near his office. She had offered to help draft a press release outlining his plans, and he wanted to discuss the messaging with her. "You've got a unique opportunity here," Rachel said as they sipped their drinks. "Your story resonates because it highlights a problem many people face but rarely talk about openly. Use that platform wisely." Marcus nodded. "I want to make it clear that this isn't about punishing individuals, it's about fixing a broken system. If the airline refuses to act, then I'll step in." Rachel smiled approvingly. "That's the right angle. Focus on solutions, not blame. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are plenty of people who believe in what you're doing." As the night drew to a close, Marcus left the cafe feeling a mix of determination and gratitude. He realized that while the road ahead would be difficult, he wasn't walking it alone. With allies like Rachel, Lisa, and countless others supporting him, he felt ready to take on whatever came next. Little did he know, the airline's leadership was already panicking behind closed doors, scrambling to contain the fallout. What began as a single act of injustice was quickly spiraling into something far larger, a movement demanding accountability, transparency, and equality. The next morning, the airline's headquarters buzzed with frantic activity. William Harper, the CEO, paced back and forth in his spacious office, his phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean, it's trending?" he barked at one of his PR managers. How could this have blown up so fast? On the other end of the line, the manager stammered nervously. "Sir, the video went viral overnight. People are calling for accountability, and the hashtags aren't slowing down. We need to act quickly." William sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. He had been in the airline industry for decades, but nothing had prepared him for a crisis like this. Social media was relentless, and the public's outrage was growing louder by the hour. "All right, William said finally. Call an emergency board meeting and get me someone who can handle damage control. Now. By midday, the boardroom was packed with executives, each looking more stressed than the last. The atmosphere was tense as William took his seat at the head of the table. Let's cut to the chase, he began sharply. We've got a major problem on our hands. This isn't just about one passenger anymore, it's about the entire company's reputation. One of the senior executives, a woman named Patricia, Lane leaned forward. We issued a statement yesterday apologizing for the incident. Isn't that enough? No, it's not, William snapped. People want action, not empty words. They're accusing us of systemic racism, and if we don't address that head-on, we'll lose customers and investors. Patricia frowned. So what do you suggest? Fire the flight crew involved? That sets a dangerous precedent. Another executive, a man named Robert, chimed in. She's right. If we fire them, every employee will think they're expendable. Morale will plummet. William slammed his hand on the table. Do you think I care about morale right now? Our stock prices are already dropping and shareholders are demanding answers. We need to show the public we're serious about fixing this. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. Finally, a younger executive named Kevin spoke up hesitantly. What if we offer compensation to Mr. Johnson? Maybe a formal apology and some kind of settlement would calm things down. William shook his head. It's too late for that. According to our legal team, Marcus Johnson owns 5% of the company through one of his investment portfolios. He has leverage and he knows it. He's not going to settle quietly. The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the room. No one had realized how much power Marcus held over the airline. For a moment, the executives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say. We need a new plan, William declared firmly. Something bold. Something that shows we're taking responsibility without completely destroying ourselves in the process. Meanwhile, Marcus was preparing for his press conference. The event was scheduled for later that afternoon, and the anticipation was palpable. Journalists from major networks had confirmed their attendance, eager to hear what Marcus had to say. Lisa and Daniel were by his side, ensuring every detail was perfect. As Marcus rehearsed his speech, Rachel arrived at the venue to offer her support. She had helped draft parts of the statement, focusing on clarity and impact. You ready for this? She asked, handing him a cup of tea. Marcus nodded, though there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. As ready as I'll ever be. Once I step out there, there's no turning back. You're doing the right thing, Rachel assured him. Just stay focused on your message. Let them see the bigger picture. By the time the press conference began, the room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing non-stop. Marcus walked onto the stage, flanked by Lisa and Daniel. He adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath before speaking. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady and calm. Thank you all for being here today. What happened to me on that flight wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a much larger issue. Discrimination based on race is still far too common, even in spaces where professionalism should prevail. He paused, letting his words sink in. I've filed a lawsuit against the airline, not just because of what happened to me, but because I believe it's time for accountability. The flight crew made a choice to prioritize one passenger over another based solely on bias. That's unacceptable. The room was silent, every eye fixed on Marcus. He continued, in addition to pursuing legal action, I'm exercising my rights as a shareholder to demand change within the company. Effective immediately, I will dismiss the entire flight crew involved in this incident, not out of anger, but as a clear statement that discriminatory behavior has no place in any organization. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters scrambled to jot down notes while camera shutters clicked furiously. Marcus raised a hand to signal he wasn't finished. This isn't about revenge, he emphasized. It's about sending a message. Companies need to take responsibility for the actions of their employees. If they fail to do so, then those of us with influence must step in. I'm also establishing a foundation dedicated to combating institutional racism. A portion of the proceeds from selling my shares in this airline will fund its launch. When Marcus stepped away from the podium, the room erupted into applause. Journalists rushed to ask follow-up questions, but Marcus simply smiled and exited the stage, leaving Lisa and Daniel to handle the media inquiries. Back at the airline's headquarters, the press conference played live on multiple screens in the boardroom. The executives watched in stunned silence as Marcus outlined his plans. William sank into his chair, his face pale. "He's really doing it," Patricia murmured, breaking the quiet. "This is going to destroy us." William shook his head slowly. "Not if we act first." He turned to Kevin. "Draft a letter of resignation addressed to Marcus Johnson. Make it sincere, and include a pledge to implement sweeping reforms across the company." Kevin blinked, surprised by the request. "Are you sure, sir?" "Yes," William replied firmly. "Sometimes swallowing your pride is the only way to survive." Later that evening, Marcus returned home exhausted but satisfied. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages of support, interview requests, and updates on the trending hashtags. He ignored most of them, choosing instead to sit quietly on his balcony and reflect. Lisa called shortly after sunset. "You did great today," she said warmly. "The response has been overwhelming. People are rallying behind you." "Thanks, Lisa," Marcus replied. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to do." "I know," Lisa agreed, "and we're with you every step of the way." As Marcus ended the call, he thought about the challenges ahead. Firing the flight crew was just one step. Changing an entire system would require patience, persistence, and collaboration. But for the first time in days, he felt hopeful. He wasn't alone in this fight. Thousands of voices were joining his, demanding justice and equality. Across town, William Harper sat in his study, staring at the resignation letter he had written. It wasn't easy admitting defeat, but he knew it was necessary. The airline's survival depended on regaining public trust, and that meant listening to people like Marcus Johnson. The next morning, William personally delivered the letter to Marcus's office. When Marcus read it, he felt a mix of emotions: satisfaction, relief, and a touch of sadness. Change often came at a cost, but it was worth it if it led to progress. As the sun rose over the city, Marcus looked out his window, imagining a future where stories like his became rare exceptions rather than painful. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The days following Marcus's press conference were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets couldn't stop talking about the story, and social media remained ablaze with discussions about racial bias in the airline industry. For Marcus, it was both exhilarating and exhausting. Every interview request, every message of support, and every critique reminded him of the weight of what he had started. But he wasn't backing down. At the airline's headquarters, William Harper's resignation letter made headlines. The move shocked many, as CEOs rarely stepped down in response to public pressure. In his letter, William admitted that the company had failed its passengers and promised sweeping reforms under new leadership. He also pledged to create a task force dedicated to addressing racial discrimination within the organization. For Marcus, this was a small victory, but only part of the larger battle. He knew that replacing one CEO wouldn't magically solve systemic issues. Real change required more than promises. It needed action. That's why he threw himself into planning the foundation he had announced during the press conference. With Rachel's help, Marcus named the foundation Equity Forward. Its mission was simple: to combat institutional racism by funding education, advocacy, and policy reform initiatives. Marcus donated a significant portion of his shares in the airline to the foundation, ensuring it would have the resources to make an impact. As word spread about Equity Forward, people from all walks of life reached out to offer their support. Some sent donations, while others volunteered their time or expertise. Among them was Andrew Miller, Marcus's mentor, who called to apologize for doubting him earlier. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Andrew said over the phone. "You were right. This isn't just about you. It's about something bigger. Count me in however you need. Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of vindication. Thanks, Andrew. I could use your guidance on building partnerships. We're going to need allies if we want to drive real change. Absolutely, Andrew replied. Let's get to work. While Marcus focused on launching Equity Forward, the airline struggled to regain public trust. The newly appointed interim CEO, Karen Ellis, faced intense scrutiny from journalists and passengers alike. Her first order of business was to meet with Marcus personally, hoping to mend fences. Karen arrived at Marcus's office one afternoon visibly nervous but determined. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as they sat down across from each other. "I know we have a lot of work to do, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right." Marcus studied her carefully. "Actions speak louder than words, Karen. What exactly are you planning to do?" Karen nodded, pulling out a folder filled with documents. "We're implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, starting immediately. We're also establishing a diversity advisory board to oversee policy changes. And we're reviewing every complaint filed in the past year to identify patterns of discrimination." Marcus listened intently, impressed by her thoroughness. "That's a good start," he said finally. "But accountability is key. If people don't see consequences for discriminatory behavior, nothing will change." Karen agreed. "Understood. We'll be transparent about disciplinary actions moving forward. No more sweeping things under the rug." Though Marcus appreciated her efforts, he remained cautious. Promises were easy to make, but delivering results was another matter entirely. Still, he decided to give Karen the benefit of the doubt, for now. Meanwhile, Rachel continued working closely with Marcus, helping shape Equity Forward's vision. She traveled across the country to speak with individuals who had experienced similar incidents of discrimination. Their stories fueled her determination to amplify their voices through the foundation. One evening, after a long day of interviews, Rachel met Marcus at a quiet cafe near his apartment. "I spoke with a woman today who was removed from a flight because the crew said her natural hair violated their dress code," Rachel shared, shaking her head. "Can you believe that?" Marcus frowned, anger simmering beneath the surface. "It's infuriating. These policies aren't accidents. They're designed to exclude certain groups of people. That's why we need to keep pushing," Rachel said firmly. "Every story matters. Every voice counts." Marcus nodded, feeling grateful for Rachel's unwavering support. "You've been amazing through all of this. Thank you for sticking with me." Rachel smiled warmly. "Like I said before, you're not alone in this. None of us should be." As weeks turned into months, Equity Forward gained momentum. The foundation hosted its first major event, a symposium on combating racial bias in corporate America, at Date, a convention center in downtown Los Angeles. Hundreds of attendees packed the venue, eager to learn and contribute. Speakers included activists, academics, and even former airline employees who had witnessed discrimination firsthand. During his keynote speech, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "When I was asked to leave my seat on that plane, I felt powerless," he admitted. "But then I realized that staying silent would only perpetuate the problem. So I chose to speak up, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin." The audience erupted into applause, moved by his honesty and courage. Afterward, dozens of people approached Marcus to share their own experiences, reinforcing the importance of the work he was doing. Back at the airline, Karen Ellis kept her promises. Anti-bias training became mandatory for all staff, and the Diversity Advisory Board began reviewing company policies. Slowly but surely, the culture within the organization started to shift. Employees reported feeling more empowered to report discriminatory behavior, knowing they would be taken seriously. Of course, not everyone was pleased with the changes. Some longtime employees grumbled about political correctness and accused management of overreacting. But Karen stood firm, reminding them that progress often came with growing pains. Despite the strides being made, Marcus knew there was still much work to be done. One evening, as he reviewed reports from Equity Forward, Lisa walked into his office carrying a stack of papers. Here's the latest data on public perception of the airline, she said, setting the documents on his desk. Looks like opinions are improving, but skepticism remains high. Marcus skimmed the pages, nodding thoughtfully. Change takes time. People won't forget overnight what happened, and they shouldn't. It's up to the airline, and all of us, to prove that we're serious about creating a fairer system. Lisa smiled softly. You're setting a powerful example, Marcus. Whether it's through the foundation or your personal actions, you're inspiring others to demand better. Marcus leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. He had never set out to become a symbol of resistance, but he understood the responsibility that came with it. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick. But as long as there were people willing to fight for justice, hope remained alive. Later that night, Marcus stood on his balcony, gazing at the city lights twinkling below. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges and obstacles. Yet, amidst the chaos, he found solace in knowing that he wasn't walking it alone. Together, with allies like Rachel, Lisa, and countless others, he was paving the way for a brighter future, one where equality wasn't just an ideal but a reality. Months had passed since the incident on the plane, and Marcus Johnson's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. What began as a personal injustice had grown into a movement that resonated far beyond his expectations. Equity Forward, the foundation he founded, was gaining traction across the country. Its programs were reaching communities, schools, and workplaces, sparking conversations about racial bias and inequality. Marcus's days were filled with meetings, interviews, and planning sessions. He traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and meeting with leaders from various industries. Each trip reminded him of how much work still needed to be done, but also of how many people were eager to help create change. One morning, Marcus boarded a flight to San Francisco for a panel discussion on corporate responsibility. As he settled into his first-class seat, he couldn't help but notice the contrast between this experience and the one months earlier. This time, the flight attendants greeted him warmly, and the passengers around him seemed relaxed and respectful. It was a small reminder of progress, though Marcus knew appearances could be deceiving. During the flight, a young woman seated beside him struck up a conversation. "Are you Marcus Johnson?" she asked hesitantly. When he nodded, her face lit up. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you're doing. Your story inspired me to speak up about something I experienced." Marcus smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you for sharing that. Stories like yours are why we keep pushing forward." The woman nodded, then pulled out her phone to show him a post she had written online about her own encounter with discrimination. Her courage reminded Marcus of the ripple effect his actions had created. Every voice mattered, and every story added to the collective call for justice. When Marcus arrived in San Francisco, he was greeted by Rachel Monroe, who had become a close collaborator and friend. Together, they headed to the conference venue, where hundreds of attendees awaited their session. The panel included executives, activists, and academics, all discussing ways to address systemic racism in business. During the discussion, Marcus shared insights from his journey. "Change starts with accountability," he said, addressing the audience. "It's not enough to acknowledge problems, we have to take action. And sometimes that means making tough decisions even when they're unpopular." The room erupted in applause, and afterward, dozens of people approached Marcus to express their gratitude. One man, a middle-aged executive from a tech company, shook his hand firmly. "Your foundation has given us tools to start difficult conversations within our organization. Thank you for leading the way." As the day wound down, Marcus and Rachel sat together at a cafe near the venue. "You've come so far," Rachel said, sipping her coffee. "Do you ever stop and think about how different things are now compared to 6 months ago?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Sometimes, but honestly, I try not to dwell on it too much. There's still so much to do." Rachel nodded, understanding his perspective. "True, but it's okay to take a moment and appreciate the impact you've made. You've inspired so many people, including me." Marcus smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For years, He had focused solely on building his career, often putting aside personal passions for the sake of professional success. Now, he realized that true achievement wasn't measured by profits or titles. It was about leaving the world better than he found it. Back in Los Angeles, the airline continued its efforts to rebuild trust. Under Karen Ellis's leadership, the company implemented sweeping reforms, including transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and regular audits of employee conduct. While some critics argued that these measures were insufficient, most agreed that the airline was heading in the right direction. Karen occasionally reached out to Marcus for advice, valuing his perspective as both a shareholder and an advocate for change. Their relationship evolved from cautious professionalism to mutual respect, as they worked together to ensure the airline became a model for others in the industry. Meanwhile, Equity Forward expanded its reach, launching partnerships with schools and community organizations. The foundation funded scholarships for underrepresented students, provided resources for grassroots activists, and hosted workshops on dismantling bias in everyday life. Marcus took pride in seeing how many lives were being touched by the foundation's work. One evening, Marcus attended a gala celebrating Equity Forward's achievements. The event brought together donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries, all united by a shared vision of equality. As Marcus stood on stage to deliver a speech, he felt overwhelmed by the sea of faces looking up at him. "When I started this journey, I didn't know where it would lead," he began, his voice steady. "All I knew was that staying silent wasn't an option. Today, I see the power of collective action. Each of you has contributed to creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces: Lisa, Rachel, Andrew, and countless others who had supported him along the way. They weren't just allies. They were family. After the gala, Marcus returned home, exhausted but content. Sitting on his balcony, he reflected on the past year. It had been a roller coaster of emotions: anger, frustration, hope, and triumph. Through it all, he had learned valuable lessons about resilience, leadership, and the importance of using his platform for good. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, ready to tackle another day. As he brewed his coffee, he glanced at the headlines on his phone. A new study showed a significant decrease in reported incidents of racial bias on flights, thanks in part to the airline's reforms. Another article highlighted Equity Forward's impact on local communities. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud of what he had accomplished. But he quickly shifted his focus back to the future. There was always more work to be done, more voices to amplify, and more barriers to break. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a call from Karen Ellis. "We just finalized the Diversity Advisory Board," she announced excitedly. "Your recommendations were incredibly helpful. Thank you for guiding us through this process." "You're welcome," Marcus replied. "Remember, this is just the beginning. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep pushing for progress." "I will," Karen promised, "and thank you for believing in us." As Marcus ended the call, he thought about the countless individuals working tirelessly to create a fairer world. He realized that no single person could solve systemic issues alone. It took collaboration, empathy, and persistence. Together, they were building bridges where walls once stood. That evening, Marcus boarded another flight, this time heading to Chicago for a meeting with potential partners for Equity Forward. As the plane ascended into the sky, he gazed out the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness below. The journey ahead was long, unpredictable, and challenging, but it was also full of promise. Marcus leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought about the passengers around him, each carrying their own stories, dreams, and struggles. Somewhere among them might be someone facing discrimination, searching for hope. And if they needed a reminder that change was possible, Marcus hoped his story would serve as proof. For now, Marcus was content knowing that he had planted seeds of change. Whether through Equity Forward, his advocacy, or simply by refusing to stay silent, he had made a difference. The road ahead was uncertain, but Marcus walked it with purpose, determination, and faith in the power of unity. As the plane soared higher, Marcus opened his laptop, ready to dive into the next chapter of his mission. The fight against inequality was far from over, but neither was his resolve to keep moving forward.